They say when you give something with love, you never ask for it back. But I've learned that sometimes silence looks like peace until someone mistakes your generosity for weakness. This isn't just a revenge story. It's what happens when a mother who gave everything realizes she was never meant to disappear. Not quietly. The morning my son asked for the house, I didn't hesitate. It wasn't a palace, just a 3-story colonial-style home in Vermont with faded green shutters and a wraparound porch that always creaked in the spring. It was where I raised Ben, where he took his first steps, had his first heartbreak, where I nursed my husband through his final days. So when Ben said, "Mom, we'd love to raise our kids in the home I grew up in," something inside me swelled. I thought, legacy. I thought, he remembers. Of course, I told him, smiling as if handing him the keys was the same as handing him a memory. What I didn't tell him was that I kept the paperwork incomplete, just one signature short. Not because I didn't trust him, but because I've lived long enough to know that love doesn't always protect you from erasure. I told myself it was just a precaution, a formality. I never thought I'd need it. Back then, I was still in the room, still the mother. Still, the woman who'd ironed his shirts for job interviews, who stayed up with him on history essays he forgot to start until 10 p.m. I had no reason to think my name would one day be left off Christmas cards sent from my own address. When Ben and his wife, Tessa, moved in, it felt like the beginning of something soft and full. I offered to stay in the guest suite on the first floor, still part of the home, but with my own privacy. They agreed. Maybe too quickly. We painted the nursery together. She picked creams and dusty blues. I didn't mind. I made meals during her pregnancy. Stayed up folding baby clothes when she couldn't sleep. I was useful then. Valuable. I was mom again. And when their daughter was born, I cried. Quietly. Alone. In the kitchen. She had Ben's chin and her father's quiet eyes. I baked a pie that night. The kind Harold loved. I told myself we'd be a family again. Years passed. And like any slow erosion, I didn't feel it at first, but bit by bit, I was being edged out. It started small. The bookshelf I built was replaced with a glass and metal modern piece. My teacups were boxed up and donated before I had a chance to ask where they went. The garden bench, Harold's favorite spot, disappeared one day after a design update. Tessa smiled through it all. Said things like, "We're just streamlining." Ellie, less clutter, more calm. And Ben, he nodded along. Eyes always somewhere else. I began to wonder if the house still smelled like cinnamon to him, or if eucalyptus candles had erased all memory of us. Still, I stayed quiet. Not because I was afraid, but because I wanted it to work. I wanted to believe that love, given again and again, would finally circle back. I even offered money. They wanted to renovate the kitchen, open it up, install some eco-friendly appliances. I pulled from my retirement fund to help. It wasn't a huge amount, $42.00, but it mattered to me. It was my yes. I'm still here. They said thank you, and then I heard them tell a friend, "We're funding the reno ourselves." Took some smart investing. I didn't say anything. I just marked the date down in my journal. I'd started doing that, writing things down. Not because I was forgetful, but because sometimes the smallest dismissals turn out to be the deepest cuts. Then came the change in tone. "You still need to use the downstairs kitchen. We have people coming over. Do you mind staying upstairs tonight? Tessa's got a Pilates friend staying. Can you maybe take the attic room for the weekend?" The attic, where the insulation doesn't quite hold and the windows rattle in wind. The space I once used to store winter coats and old vinyl records. Still, I said yes. Each yes chipped a little piece of me away. But I thought it's just space. I didn't realize until later that they weren't just asking for space. They were asking for silence, for me to fade politely. Ben started calling it his house, not ours, not mine. I corrected him once, gently. "You mean the family home?" He smiled like I'd made a cute mistake. Tessa began inviting friends over without telling me. Once, I came downstairs in my robe and found strangers sipping cocktails in the living room. She laughed and said, Oops, should have texted. And maybe the worst part, I kept baking. I kept folding laundry. I kept being useful because I still believed there was something holy about motherhood, about being needed. I didn't know I was already being phased out, not kicked out, but softly erased. And that, I think, is the cruelest kind of betrayal. Not the loud kind, not the screaming matches, but the quiet rebranding of your presence into an inconvenience. Still, I stayed because I remembered what this house meant, because I wanted to believe Ben still saw me, because I was waiting for something, maybe gratitude, maybe just a look. But what I didn't know then was that this story wasn't ending. It was turning. And the page was about to flip, louder than they ever expected. There are things people say that seem harmless at first, a joke, a small correction, a quick look away, but then they start to pile up until one day you realize you've been edited out of your own life. It started on a Monday. The kind of gray Vermont morning that clings to your bones. I was making tea in the downstairs kitchen when I heard Ben and Tessa laughing from the living room. Ben said something like, "It's weird having the house so quiet in the mornings now." Tessa responded, "Well, it helps when she stays upstairs." Then more laughter, muffled, but not enough. I stood there, fingers wrapped around my mug, not even breathing. It wasn't the words, it was the way they said them. Like I wasn't real, like I was some quirky old relic you politely tolerate in the background. That same week, I came home from a walk to find my reading chair missing. The one I bought with Harold the year Ben started first grade. Velvet, a little faded at the arms, but perfect under the bay window. I asked Ben where it went. He didn't even look up from his laptop. Tessa thought it was time to refresh the space, he said. I waited for him to notice how quiet I got, for him to glance at me, maybe add, "We saved it for you," or even "sorry." Mom, nothing. That was the first time I felt something harden in my chest. The second time, a week later, when I went to grab my gardening gloves from the mudroom and found the shelves replaced with white minimalist cabinetry, no gloves, no tools, just tiny labeled jars that looked like props in a fake home. I asked Tessa if she moved them. She smiled. All teeth and gloss. "Oh, that clutter. We donated everything. You hadn't touched it in a while, right?" "Right," I said. What else could I say? That I needed those gloves to feel like myself. That touching soil made me feel closer to the woman I used to be. Instead, I said nothing, and I started writing things down. Not because I planned anything, just to remember that I wasn't crazy, that things were changing. If any of you have ever lived in a place you no longer felt welcome in, a home that turned cold while you were still paying the heating bill, drop a comment below. I read everyone. You're not invisible here. Back to that autumn, the guest suite, which used to be mine, got repurposed for Tessa's meditation practice. She said she needed space to realign her energy, so I was gently nudged up to the attic. I laughed. At first, not because it was funny, because it was absurd. I'd paid for half that guest suite's renovation when Harold was still alive. I picked out the window trim, the lilac wallpaper, the antique drawer pulls. But now, my nightstand was a cardboard box, and my bed was a cot with uneven legs. Still, I nodded. Still, I went along. Because when your own child suggests something, even when it hurts, there's a voice inside you that says, "Don't rock the boat. Don't make them feel guilty. They'll come around." But they didn't come around. At dinner one night, I asked if we were still doing Thanksgiving together, if they wanted me to cook like always. Ben said, "Oh, Tessa's planning something more modern this year. Charcuterie, no turkey. And we were thinking of inviting her colleagues." I blinked. "So, not family?" He shrugged. "Well, it's a different kind of family now." I felt my fork stall in the air. Then Tessa added, "It'll be more of a friendsgiving. Casual. You're totally welcome to join if you want." "Ellie, if I want?" I nodded and chewed without tasting. That night, I sat in the attic with the space heater humming like a bad apology. I stared at the ceiling for a long time, wondering if maybe I was imagining things. Maybe this was just how aging worked. You made room until you disappeared. But the next morning proved me wrong. I overheard Tessa on the phone, her voice floating down the hall. No, she's still here. I know. Yeah. Ben's trying to ease her out gently. Maybe after the holidays. We've got real estate options already. Assisted living. Or something. Assisted living. I closed my eyes. Let the words hit. Let them bruise before they could scar. They weren't even trying to hide it anymore. Not even pretending I mattered. And still, I set the table that evening. Still baked the cornbread. Still smiled when Tessa complimented the crust on the apple pie she didn't even taste. Because if I stopped being useful, I knew what came next. But here's the truth no one warns you about. It's not the insults that break you. It's the polite dismissals. The way people erase you with a smile. I wasn't just being pushed out of rooms. I was being written out of the story I helped build. And that, more than anything, told me it was time, not to yell, not to fight, but to remember exactly what I still owned and what I'd never actually given away. It happened just 3 days before Thanksgiving. I was setting out the cloth napkins in the dining room, navy blue, the ones I used every year when Harold was still alive, when Tessa walked in with that air she always had, like every room belonged to her now. Ellie, she said lightly, we won't need those this year. I looked up. The cloth napkins, she smiled. We're going with a more modern aesthetic, rustic paper, less old-fashioned. I held one napkin in my hand a moment longer, then folded it neatly and placed it back into the drawer without a word. That was the last time I touched any part of Thanksgiving prep. They didn't ask me to make the cranberry sauce or the cornbread stuffing Ben used to love, or the pecan pie recipe Harold begged for every fall. Tessa took it all over. The menu, the guest list, the kitchen, the whole house. It felt like I stayed upstairs that week. I didn't want to watch her wipe away the traces of the woman who used to host these dinners. The woman who remembered every guest's food allergy, who ironed tablecloths and lit cinnamon candles in the hallway. It wasn't just a holiday anymore. It was a production, one I'd been quietly written out of. But I hadn't yet realized just how far they'd gone. The night before Thanksgiving, I went down to the mudroom to get my gardening gloves, my morning ritual, even in the cold, and found the door locked. It had never been locked before. I knocked lightly, then turned the knob again, just to be sure. Still locked. I asked Ben about it over dinner. Is something wrong with the mudroom door? He glanced up from his phone. Oh, right? We had a locksmith come by. Tessa wanted to store some things in there. She's organizing. I see, I said, though I didn't. Later that night, I walked through the house like a ghost, checking for the small things that still belonged to me. My cookbooks, gone. My framed photo of Ben's graduation, replaced with a black and white print of abstract shapes. My teapot was nowhere in the kitchen. The shelves were cleared, sanitized. It was like I had never lived there. The worst of it came the next morning. Thanksgiving Day. Guests arrived in waves. All faces I didn't know. Tessa's co-workers, her yoga teacher, a couple she met at a networking brunch. They smiled politely, called me Miss Ellie, and stepped around me like I was part of the furniture. I wasn't angry. Not then. Just hollow. The table was set with pale stoneware. The kind that chips when you look at it wrong. No warmth, no colors, just muted gray. As if the food itself didn't deserve to be remembered, I stood at the edge of the dining room, watching as they poured wine and laughed at inside jokes, until Ben finally waved me over. Grab a plate, Mom, he said, gesturing toward the buffet. We saved you a spot. I walked over slowly, my hands colder than I realized. I reached for the sweet potatoes, the way I always had, half smiling, trying to find some version of the old rhythm. But just as I scooped the spoon toward my plate, Ben reached over and took it from my hand. I've got that, he said. Let me help you. Before I could respond, he leaned in and added, You don't live here anymore. Remember, he said it low, like a joke meant only for me. But it wasn't funny, not even close. My throat dried out, the kind of dry that comes when a door slams on a memory. I stepped back. My plate slipped from my hand and clattered to the floor, not shattered, Just cracked like me. Silence dropped over the table like a curtain. No one moved. Tessa's smile froze. The baby stopped babbling. Even the dog stopped whining under the table. And Ben, my Ben, he just stood there, holding the spoon like he'd done me a favor. I didn't say a word. I bent down, picked up the plate, and walked it slowly to the kitchen. I rinsed it off, dried it, placed it back in the cabinet. And then I went upstairs. My legs were shaking, but not from age, from the realization that this humiliation wasn't new. It was just the first time they didn't try to hide it. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the attic room they gave me on a mattress that creaked when I breathed and stared out the frosted window at the garden below. Once, it had roses. Now it was just dirt and gravel and the faint glow of solar lights Tessa ordered online. They had replaced everything, and I had let them. I tried to cry, but no tears came, just a tightness in my chest, like mourning something that hadn't died yet, but was already gone. Me. I wasn't Rosalind anymore. Not the woman who hosted Thanksgiving. Not the mother who stayed up until 2 sewing Ben's Halloween costume. Not the wife who used to sneak kisses in the pantry while the roast cooked. I was just extra. And when a person is made to feel extra long enough, she starts believing it, until something reminds her, quietly, firmly, that she still owns the roots. That something, for me, would come soon. But in that moment, I sat in my borrowed attic with my borrowed blankets and listened to the sound of strangers laughing in my living room, and I made a decision. I would not let them bury me while I was still breathing. Not in my own home. Not ever. The morning after Thanksgiving was cold. Not just weather cold, but something deeper, a kind of chill that sat in your bones even after the sun came up. The house was quiet. Too quiet for a place that had held laughter just 12 hours earlier. I sat at the edge of the attic bed, my new room, if you could call it that, and stared at the same folded sweater I hadn't touched in days. I used to love that sweater. Harold bought it for me one fall in New Hampshire. Now, it just felt like another piece of me collecting dust. I went downstairs without making a sound. Years of motherhood had trained me to walk through a house like I wasn't there. The kitchen was already spotless. No signs of the feast from the night before. Tessa worked fast when it came to scrubbing the evidence of anything sentimental. I made coffee, not because I wanted it, but because the sound of the percolator made the house feel less empty. And then I did something I hadn't done in months. I went to the file cabinet in the office. It had always been mine, organized down to color-coded tabs and sticky notes. But lately, Ben had started storing his own things in there too. Bills, mail, whatever he didn't want cluttering his new minimalist desk upstairs. But the bottom drawer still held what mattered to me. Third file from the back. Property. Cooper home. I pulled it out slowly. There it was, yellowed just slightly at the edges, but still crisp. The unfinished deed transfer. 7 years ago, I had agreed to gift Ben the house. We met with a lawyer, started the paperwork, even signed a preliminary agreement, but I had never finished it. I had asked the lawyer to hold the final deed, unsigned by me, just in case. Just in case had arrived. The file even had a post-it note I'd forgotten I left. Don't sign if you're not treated like family. I stared at it for a long time, longer than I meant to. My hands didn't shake. My breath didn't catch. I felt calm, too calm. That's when I knew. This wasn't a bad moment or a misunderstanding. This wasn't something time would fix. This was a quiet eviction. A slow, smiling push into the margins. And I was the only one who had the power to stop it. I called Deborah White that same afternoon. She was retired now, sort of. Once my colleague at the university library, she'd gone back to law school in her 50s and become the sharpest elder rights attorney in the county. I'd helped her through divorce. She'd helped me through estate planning. We had a quiet friendship, the kind you don't talk about, but always count on. Ellie, she said as soon as she picked up, her voice warm with recognition. I was wondering when I'd hear from you again. I didn't bother with pleasantries. Do you remember that deed we drafted in 2016? You never signed it, she said instantly. Want to tell me what's going on? Ben thinks he owns the house, I said. But legally, I never gave it to him. And now, I think it's time I take it back. Deborah didn't gasp or scold. She simply said, "I'll pull the file. Come by tomorrow." After we hung up, I sat in the kitchen a while longer, tracing the lip of my coffee mug. I thought about everything I had given this family, the sleepless nights, the mortgage payments, the sweat equity. I thought about all the Thanksgivings I had hosted, the birthdays I had planned, the times I had bitten my tongue, and I realized something so clear it stunned me. I had never actually asked for anything back. Not really. I had given freely, hoping it would come full circle. But sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes people take what you give and turn it into entitlement. They call your presence a burden. They rewrite your love as interference. And when that happens, you don't have to scream. You don't have to beg. You just have to remember who you are and who you were before they convinced you otherwise. That night, I pulled out a fresh notebook. Not the yellow legal pad I'd been using to track the little things. No, this was different. This was for everything. I wrote down dates, quotes, incidents. I sketched the layout of the house and marked every room they'd stripped of my presence. I documented conversations, filed memories under headings like isolation, dismissal, public humiliation. Each word on the page was a step back toward myself. The last thing I wrote that night, in all caps across the top of a blank page, was this: he never owned it, not legally, not spiritually, and not anymore. As I turned off the light and crawled into the attic bed, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel erased. For the first time in a long while, I felt still, not defeated, just steady, and the kind of steady that comes before a storm no one sees coming. I didn't rush. There was no speech, no confrontation, no door slamming or demands made across the dinner table. That wasn't my style. And more importantly, that wasn't how I was going to win. I had always known how to work quietly. When you're a mother, especially one of a son like Ben, you learn early how to get things done without needing credit for it. You learn how to hold things together behind the curtain so the show keeps running. This was no different. Except now, I wasn't keeping the show going. I was preparing to walk off stage and take the entire set with me. I met with Deborah the next day, in her new office downtown, smaller than the one she had during her peak trial years, but still neat, focused, sharp. Like her, she hugged me without words, sat me down with a cup of Earl Grey, and pulled out the file. "I reviewed the deed again last night," she said. "You were smart. You left enough ambiguity that legally, this house is still yours." I let out a small breath. I wasn't trying to be smart. I was trying to leave room for grace. She looked up, straight into my eyes. And now, I'm out of grace. That was the only time either of us smiled. We started building the file, page by page, screenshot by screenshot. Every digital receipt Ben rerouted to his name. Every email from Tessa about modernizing the home. Every calendar entry that mysteriously excluded me from family events. Birthday dinners, school plays. I'd kept everything. Not because I'd planned this, but because I've always believed in paper trails. And now, those trails would lead us exactly where we needed to go. Back home, that same week, I visited a clinic in Bard, a good half-hour away. No one knew I went. I booked it under a fake name, my maiden name, and requested a full cognitive evaluation. I passed every test. Reflexes, memory, logic, comprehension. The neurologist, a kind woman who reminded me of my old dean, shook her head with a little smile as she handed me the report. "You've got a sharper mind than most people 30 years younger." I slid the report into my binder like a blade, because I knew what was coming. I'd seen the signs, the whispered comments, the sudden concern when I misplaced a spoon or forgot the name of Tessa's coworker's child. I wasn't old, but they were trying to make me look it. And once people paint you as fading, it gives them permission to start scrubbing you out entirely. I started playing the part, nothing dramatic, just enough. Leaving the kettle on a few seconds too long, walking into a room and pretending to forget why, asking Ben, just once, if he knew where I left my checkbook, though I knew exactly where it was, Tessa bit fast, too fast. Sticky notes began to appear around the house. Take your pills. Don't forget the laundry. Remember to eat. Each one written in bubbly Sharpie letters. Each one taped somewhere visible. Fridge. Bathroom mirror. The door to the attic. They looked sweet on the surface, but they weren't love. They were evidence being planted. And I let her plant it. Because I was building a garden of my own. The house had security cameras now. Ben's idea. Though he never got around to setting them up properly. What he didn't know was that I had my own. A discreet nanny cam tucked inside an old porcelain clock on the bookshelf. Harold's clock. They never even looked at it. That clock saw everything. The way Tessa spoke to me when no one was around. The moment she scolded me in a voice syrupy enough to rot your teeth. The way she read my mail out loud to friends on speakerphone like it was entertainment. I cataloged it all. Meanwhile, I smiled. I helped slice apples for her smoothie bowls. I agreed with Ben when he said I might be happier in a smaller place. Someday, I even clapped politely when their son performed a Thanksgiving poem that didn't mention me once. I played soft because I needed them to believe I had folded. And when they believed it, when they truly believed I had nothing left to fight with, that's when I moved. I contacted Deborah again and told her I was ready to initiate. You want to go legal? She asked. No, I said calmly. I want to go quiet, but final. She nodded once, then started drafting the motion. Full legal retraction of any shared property status, based on incomplete transfers, financial manipulation, and emotional coercion. We had the cognitive report, the surveillance, the documented timeline, and, most importantly, we had the deed, unfinished, waiting, like it had always been saving me from this very moment. When I got back to the house that afternoon, Tessa was standing on the back deck with a glass of wine, laughing on the phone. I stood quietly for a second, just listening to her voice float through the air. She doesn't even realize it's not her house anymore, she said, giggling. She still acts like she matters. I didn't interrupt. I didn't walk away. Either, I just stood still, staring at the yard she had turned cold with gravel and fence posts, until she noticed me. She turned, mid-laugh, and froze. Oh, didn't hear you come in. I've always been here, I said, my voice light. You just forgot to look. And then I walked back inside, calm, steady, ready. Because when people try to erase you, you don't scream to prove you're real. You make sure when you rise. They have to read your name in bold print to understand just how wrong they were to forget it. I chose dinner, not lunch, not mid-morning, not some random weekday knock on the door. Dinner, because dinner still held a memory of what we used to be. It was the only time of day when the family sat down at one table, even if now it was more performance than presence. The lighting was soft, the food was curated. Everyone pretended they had something worth toasting, and I wanted that moment, the illusion of their control, to be the stage where I quietly pulled the rug out. Deborah asked me twice if I was sure. They'll be blindsided, she said. You'll be burning the bridge in front of them. I smiled and folded the napkin in my lap like I was already at the table. There's no bridge left, I told her. Just ash. It was a Thursday night. Roasted chicken, sweet potatoes, a kale salad that no one really touched. Tessa had spent the afternoon plating everything like a cooking show. I stayed mostly quiet, sipping my water, making polite noises when asked about the weather. Ben had just started talking about refinancing the house again, my house, when the doorbell rang. Tessa looked annoyed. Did someone forget to tell me we had more guests? Ben stood to answer it, still talking over his shoulder about mortgage rates. I just kept cutting my chicken. The door opened, and then came silence. Not the kind you feel when a conversation dies, the kind that slides in like fog, heavy, still, waiting. I didn't have to look. I already knew what he'd see. A man in a dark blazer, holding a manila envelope with my name and Deborah's logo printed across the corner. Mr. Benjamin Cooper, the man asked. Ben hesitated. Yes, you've been served. The papers were placed gently in Ben's hands, like a gift wrapped in consequences. The server nodded once, stepped back into the November air, and was gone before anyone inside could ask a single question. Tessa stared, her mouth parted, ready to speak, but no words came. Ben read the first page, then the second, and on the third, something in his face shifted. I'd seen that look before, on students who didn't study for finals, who thought charisma would carry them through. "What is this?" he asked me, voice flat, unreadable. I set my fork down and wiped the corner of my mouth with a napkin. Not rushed, not smug, just finished. "That," I said, "is your reminder that I never signed away the deed." He stared at me, blinking like he was trying to restart the moment. This says the house isn't mine. It never was," I said gently. "Not legally. You had the shell, but not the signature. But we've lived here for years," Tessa blurted. "You said, I let you stay," I replied. "I never said you owned it." For a moment, no one moved. Then Ben slammed the folder onto the table, hard enough to knock over his wine glass. Red bled into the placemat like a wound. "This is insane," he said. "Jaw tight. You're kicking us out." I didn't flinch. "I'm reclaiming what was always mine." Tessa finally found her footing. "After everything we've done for you." That made me laugh. Not out loud, just inside, where my dignity had been quietly sharpening for months. "You mean letting me sleep in the attic? Taping notes to the fridge so people would think I'm losing my memory? Reading my mail? Throwing out my things? That everything?" Her mouth opened, closed, opened again, like a fish gasping for air. I stood slowly. The room suddenly felt bigger. Not because I had grown, but because I'd finally stopped shrinking. "I didn't want this," I said. "But you made it clear there was no space for me in the home I built. So now, there's no space for you in the home you borrowed." Ben whispered something, maybe to himself. I didn't ask him to repeat it. There wasn't anything left I needed to hear. Have you ever had to stand your ground like that? Not with shouting, not with threats, but with quiet certainty. Let me know in the comments if you've ever had a moment where reclaiming your peace came at the cost of someone else's comfort. Because let me tell you, there's nothing selfish about choosing not to be erased. Back in the dining room, Ben had finally sat down, his shoulders sagging like someone much older than he was. "You could have just talked to us," he muttered. "I tried," I said. "You weren't listening." Tessa was still staring at me like I'd become someone else entirely. And maybe I had. Maybe that's what reclaiming looks like, when a woman stops asking to be seen and simply becomes undeniable. I gathered my plate, walked to the kitchen, and scraped the rest of my dinner into the compost bin. It felt like shedding skin. That night, Deborah texted me. "It's done. They've been legally notified. The clock starts now. 15 days. 15 days until the locks changed. Until my name was back where it belonged. Until I wasn't just allowed in the house, I was home." I stood on the back porch, watching the last of the light disappear behind the hills. My hands were steady, my heart quiet, not triumphant, not angry, just finally free enough to stop apologizing for surviving. The house went quiet in the days that followed. Not peacefully quiet, but the kind of quiet that follows a slammed door. Thick, watchful, edged. Ben barely looked me in the eye. He'd pass by me in the hallway with a stiffness I hadn't seen since he was a teenager, trying to hide a bad report card. Tessa, on the other hand, couldn't stop herself. Her movements became sharper, her tone more clipped. The sweetness in her voice now sugar-coated acid. "I noticed you didn't take the trash out," she said the next morning. I smiled as I stirred my tea. "You noticed, right?" She stared at me like she couldn't figure out who I was anymore. That made two of us. I kept my routines the same. Early walks. Tea at 8. Reading by the front window when the light was right. Not because I was trying to prove anything, but because I was reclaiming something they thought I'd lost. Presence. I didn't hide in the attic anymore. I used the main bathroom. Cooked in the kitchen. Left the front door open when the sun was out. The house no longer felt like it belonged to them. And they felt it too. Ben tried to negotiate. First, it was a calm conversation at the dinner table. "Mom, we don't have to go through all this," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. Maybe we can find a compromise, a shared agreement. You stay, we stay. I shook my head gently. Ben, you already moved me out. You just forgot to pack my things. He looked like he wanted to say more, but didn't know how. Or maybe he was waiting for Tessa to chime in. She didn't. She just stabbed at her salad like it had done something personal to her. The second attempt was guilt. Ben came into my room one evening, holding an old photo, us in the backyard, Harold grilling. Ben holding a sparkler like it was a torch. You really want to destroy this? He asked. I looked at the photo. My hands had planted those hedges behind us. My sweat had built that deck. My love had raised that boy. And still, I had become a guest in my own legacy. I looked him in the eye. I'm not destroying anything. I'm just taking back what was mine to begin with. He left without another word. It wasn't just the legal blow that shook them. It was the shift in energy. The fact that I no longer asked for permission to exist. That I didn't justify my place at the table. That I didn't flinch when Tessa sighed at my footsteps or rolled her eyes when I poured coffee into the good china. They were waiting for the old version of me to come back, the one who apologized when she hadn't done anything wrong, who folded her needs into a corner to keep the peace. But that woman had stopped showing up. I wasn't cruel. I wasn't loud. I was just solid, unmoved. And that, I think, terrified them more than any argument ever could. The tension broke one night when I found the guest bedroom door closed again, locked, like before. I tried the knob once. Nothing. I knocked lightly. From inside, Tessa called out, "We need space." I waited a beat, then responded, "So do I." I turned and walked away, not back to the attic, but down the hall to the office. The door opened easily. Inside was a printer, a small bookshelf, and a chair I hadn't sat in for years. I took the chair, turned on the lamp, and I wrote in my notebook, the one with the bold letters on the front. He never owned it. That became my quiet mantra. When people forget what you gave, when they convince themselves they built the house you laid the first brick for, sometimes silence is the strongest storm. You don't need thunder when the earth already knows you're coming. I never raised my voice, but I took up space again. And that, for the first time in a long while, felt like power. It was the photo album that did it. I hadn't opened it in years, not since Harold passed. Not since Ben stopped calling me Mama and started referring to me as she in conversations with his wife. But something in me that week, in the middle of that quiet war inside the house, needed to remember. It was buried in a trunk at the bottom of the linen closet. The one Tessa kept meaning to clear out to make space for her yoga mats. I pulled it out gently, brushed off the layer of dust, and sat down on the hallway floor. The first page was our wedding. The second, the day we bought the house. Back then, it was just a patch of overgrown weeds and a cracked concrete porch. But Harold believed in it, and I believed in him. We painted that house with our bare hands. I planted the first rose bush myself, on my knees in the dirt while Ben napped in a laundry basket next to me. He was 6 months old. The album flipped through years like it was breathing. Ben's second birthday. His first scraped knee. Me, standing on the porch with a paintbrush in my hand. Cheeks sunburned. Smiling like the world was mine. I didn't even notice Tessa standing in the hallway until she spoke. "What's that?" I closed the album. Looked up. History. She leaned against the door frame, arms crossed like always. "Looks old." "It is. You know," she said, a little too casually. "We're planning to repaint the house next month. Give it a more modern vibe." I stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly, I opened the album again and turned it so she could see. "That's me painting this house. 40 years ago." Tessa's eyes flickered. Just for a second. I didn't realize. "No," I said. "You didn't." She didn't say anything else. She just stood there a minute, then walked away. But I knew something had landed. Later that afternoon, Ben came home from work and found me in the kitchen, making tea. He looked tired, older than he should have. He sat at the counter, quiet. "I saw the photos," he said finally. I didn't look up. And he let out a slow breath. "I forgot how much of this house is you." I stirred my tea. "You didn't forget. You just stopped remembering." He didn't argue. There's something hollow in a man's silence when he realizes he's erased the hands that fed him. He glanced down at his phone, then back up at me. Did you really sleep in the attic all these months without saying anything? I said something every day, I replied. You just never heard me. The silence stretched, and in it, I saw what he wouldn't say. He didn't know how to undo it. Not really. Not after all this time. Not after watching me disappear little by little while he looked the other way. That night, I pulled another box from the closet. This one was smaller. Inside it was the letter Harold had written me before he passed. I hadn't read it in years. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened it with both hands like it might break. Rosie, it began. This house is you. Don't let anyone ever forget that, even if they try, especially if they try. I held the letter against my chest and closed my eyes. They had tried. Oh, how they tried. To scrub me out of the home I raised them in. To downplay the hands that built the foundation. To make me feel like a squatter in my own legacy. But the walls remembered. The floors creaked the way Harold used to laugh. The garden bloomed each spring in the pattern of my planting. The air still carried the scent of cinnamon and clove from 1,000 Thanksgivings ago. The memories weren't gone. They were waiting to be seen again. And I wasn't done showing them. The envelope came on a Monday. I recognized Deborah's handwriting immediately, firm, clean, and confident. No frills, no loops, just facts. I held it in my hand for a long moment before opening it, like somehow the weight of what was inside had to settle first. Inside was a single page, stamped, sealed, filed and finalized. The house was legally mine. No conditions, no shared ownership, no transfer pending signatures. Just one name, Rosaline Margaret Cooper. I ran my thumb over the ink. It didn't feel like victory. Not exactly. It felt like a return. Later that day, I sat at the kitchen table with the document in front of me and brewed myself a fresh pot of coffee. Not the bland roast Tessa stocked, mine, the dark, rich blend Harold used to bring back from that little shop downtown. The smell filled the house like a memory with a spine. Ben walked in just as I was pouring my first cup. He looked deflated. Not angry, not even tired. Just like a man who realized he'd never really understood the rules of the game he thought he was winning. I got the notice, he said. I nodded. I figured. He sat across from me, stared at the document. So, what now? You tell me, I said gently. You're the one who told me I didn't live here anymore. His jaw tensed, but he didn't argue. That surprised me. He stared at his hands. I don't know when I started seeing you as less. I didn't speak. I think maybe I resented how much of this house was you, how much of my life still echoed your choices. I wanted space, and then when I had it, I didn't know what to do with it. I let the silence hold, because silence sometimes says what words can't. I was wrong, he said finally. I nodded. Not as forgiveness, but as acknowledgement. The difference matters. Tessa wants to fight it, he added. My eyes met his. Let her. That's when I saw it. Just the smallest flicker in his face. A realization, maybe, that he had married someone who had always seen me as a placeholder. And now, that placeholder had a deed. I'm not going to, he said after a beat. I told her, we'll start looking for a place. He stood, lingered a moment, then walked away. No drama, no tears, just a quiet shift in weight. Like something had finally landed. That evening, I went through the house with a notebook and a pen and started making a list. Not a list of chores. A list of things I wanted to bring back. The yellow curtains in the kitchen. The blue plates from our first anniversary. The quilt I sewed when Ben was born. Little things. Big meanings, one by one. I wrote them down. Not because I needed to restore the house to what it was before, but because I wanted to remind it, and myself, that I was still here. Still choosing. And in that moment, I want to ask you something. Have you ever reclaimed something that was quietly taken from you? Not with shouting, not with drama, but with calm, firm steps. If you have, you know it's not about revenge. It's about remembrance. Let me know in the comments. What did you take back when they thought you never would? Because your story, your quiet rise, might be the one someone else is waiting to hear. That night, I lit a candle. Just one, the same kind Harold used to light when he worked late, and I waited up with a book in hand and cocoa on the stove. I sat beside it on the couch, wrapped in the old quilt I had found in the attic, and I felt the house breathing again, not with noise, but with peace. The kind of peace that comes when the soil knows its gardener has returned, when the walls recognize your footsteps, when the name on the deed is finally the name that built the home. Mine, they left in pieces, not in the way people storm out during an argument, slamming doors and breaking dishes. No, theirs was a slower kind of exit. One cardboard box at a time, one curtain quietly folded, one drawer left slightly ajar, as if unsure whether to take everything or leave something behind. It started with the closet. Ben moved his suits into the hallway linen cabinet, carefully zipped in garment bags, like he couldn't admit that they were leaving, just rearranging. Tessa followed 2 days later, packing her scented candles and imported teas into a floral print tote she'd gotten from some lifestyle blog giveaway. Neither of them said the words, but the house knew. They no longer moved with ownership. They moved with caution, as if the floor beneath them had changed somehow, gone soft in places. Unpredictable. I said nothing. I cooked breakfast for myself each morning and made 2 cups of coffee. Not out of habit, but out of grace. 1 cup always sat cooling on the table beside me, untouched. I never said who it was for. The 3rd day, I noticed Tessa standing in the hallway, staring at the framed photo of Harold and me on our 20th anniversary. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. I simply passed her with a folded set of sheets in my arms and said, "That's the summer we repainted the whole house ourselves. Took us 3 weekends." She blinked, then nodded once, before stepping aside. By the end of the week, Ben came to me holding an envelope. Inside was a check. For what? I asked quietly. He hesitated. For rent. For the past few months. I don't know how to fix everything, but I can start here. I looked at the check, at his handwriting on the memo line. For your space. I didn't cash it, but I didn't tear it up either. I kept it tucked inside the back of my journal, behind the page where I had once written in all caps, "He never owned it," because now he finally knew that too. The moving van came on a Saturday. Quiet. Efficient. No family send-off. No tearful goodbye. Tessa barely made eye contact. She didn't hug me. She didn't say thank you. But just before she got in the car, she paused by the front step and looked back at the house. She opened her mouth like she wanted to say something, but didn't. Instead, she nodded at me once, curt, as if to say, "I get it now." Then she was gone. Ben lingered. He always had a harder time leaving. Maybe it's because he knew what was lost couldn't be boxed up or folded into the back seat of a Prius. "I didn't mean to erase you," he said. I gave him the softest smile I could. "You didn't erase me. You just forgot I was the one who handed you the pen." He looked down. That boy who once clung to my leg at kindergarten drop-off was still there, somewhere beneath the tired man in front of me. He reached for a hug. I gave it to him, not because he earned it, but because I had learned that healing wasn't about who apologized first. It was about who was strong enough to walk through the silence afterward without needing to be forgiven. When he drove away, the street fell quiet. No engine hum, no porch light flickering. No Tessa rearranging patio chairs like she was trying to reshape the world. Just me, and the house, and peace. Not the kind that feels empty, the kind that feels earned. I went room by room that evening, opened the windows, let the air breathe again. I put my hand on the banister Harold built and whispered, "We're home." Because the home was no longer a battleground. It was mine again. The walls no longer echoed with tension. They remembered laughter, cinnamon rolls, the hum of Sunday jazz. And I was no longer a guest in my own legacy. I was the keeper of it. I didn't rush to fill the empty spaces. There's a strange kind of stillness that comes after people leave, not silence. Exactly. But the quiet presence of absence. Their voices were gone, their clutter, their energy. For a few days, the house felt like a deep exhale. I let it breathe. Then I got to work. Not because I was trying to move on or pretend the damage never happened, but because I finally had the freedom to tend to what had been neglected. Not just the baseboards or the peeling paint, but the pieces of myself I'd pushed into corners to keep peace. The attic was first. I opened every box, not just the ones with holiday decorations and Harold's old records, but the hard ones too. The baby clothes I'd saved without knowing why. The letters Ben wrote from college, back when he still signed them, "Love you always." The Mother's Day cards that stopped arriving after Tessa took over the calendar. I didn't cry over them. I just held them, read them, and decided what stayed and what went. Some things I finally let go of, but others I reclaimed. I pulled out the ceramic baking dish Harold bought me for our third Christmas and placed it back in the kitchen cabinet where it belonged. I rehung the framed quilt square from my mother's sewing circle, and in the hallway, I put up a photo I'd never dared display before. Me holding newborn Ben, exhausted and glowing, with Harold's hand on my shoulder. That was the house's true beginning, and it was time to remember it. Every room got a new coat of paint. Nothing flashy, just fresh. I chose colors that felt like breathing. Soft greens, warm creams, the pale yellow of spring light through a window. I fixed the loose stair tread, replaced the flickering bulb on the porch, hired a gardener to help me bring back the roses, real ones, not the trimmed box hedges Tessa installed to impress her friends. The roses would take time, but so did I. Some days, I'd sit on the back steps with a glass of lemonade and just listen to the house, its creaks, its settling bones, its history humming quietly in the floorboards. I was no longer trying to make the house feel alive. I was letting it remember that it already was. I started baking again, not for guests or approval, but because I missed the smell of vanilla and cinnamon filling the rooms. One morning, I made Harold's favorite, blueberry muffins with brown sugar tops, and set one on the windowsill while I ate mine slowly, with jazz playing low in the background. And that's when something unexpected happened. The neighbor's daughter, Claire, about 10 years old, came over and knocked on the back gate. "Hi," she said shyly, eyes on the muffin. "My mom says you're the one who used to give out the good cookies at Halloween." I smiled. "I'm guilty of that." She looked hopeful. "Can I sit with you?" I made a second muffin. We sat on the porch together, her legs swinging off the step, and she told me all about her school science fair project. I listened like it was the most important thing I'd heard in months, because in some ways it was. The house was waking up again, not with noise, with presence. Word spread, slowly. Neighbors I hadn't seen in years dropped off extra tomatoes from their gardens or waved longer than usual when they passed by. One Sunday, "Mrs. Eddings brought over a pie just because you look more like yourself lately," she said. That stayed with me, because I hadn't realized how invisible I had become, not just in this house, but in this life. How easy it was for people to forget you when you shrink to fit someone else's comfort. But now, the rooms had space for me again, and I wasn't filling them with bitterness. I was filling them with breath, with music, with muffins and rose petals and the sound of Claire's laugh echoing in the kitchen as I taught her how to separate eggs. I was restoring more than a house. I was restoring a place in the world, not for guests, not for my son, for me. It wasn't a letter. It wasn't even a call. It was a forwarded invitation, gold foil, cream cardstock, overly expensive. I found it tucked inside my mailbox between a utility bill and a grocery flyer. The envelope had no return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Tessa's wedding shower invitation for her sister. The event was being hosted at the lake house. That's what the card called it. Not Ben and Tessa's place, not our home away from home, just the lake house, printed as if it were some neutral location plucked out of a lifestyle magazine. I held the invitation between my fingers for a moment, the kind of moment where the world slows down, not because you're hurt, but because you're deciding whether you even care. And I realized I wasn't going, not out of spite, but because I didn't need to. They had built a life on the illusion of ownership of property, of respect, of memory, but without roots. A house becomes just a shell, and even now, in their carefully curated invitation. It was clear they were still performing, still trying to prove something. I no longer needed to watch. I walked back into the house, dropped the card on the kitchen counter, and poured myself a cup of tea. The real kind. The one Deborah used to send me in care packages when things were hard. That afternoon, I trimmed the roses. They'd started blooming again. Not all of them, but enough to see that the soil was still good, still willing to believe. Claire came by around 4. "Want to see my school project?" she asked, holding up a little clay volcano with glitter lava. It exploded. I smiled. "Let's make it erupt again." Later, after she left, I stood at the window and watched the sun stretch across the porch Harold built. It looked golden, even under the dust. The years were still there, layered in the wood. But so was something else. Peace. That night, I lit a candle, not for memory, not for grief, just because it smelled like honey and made the room feel warm. Then the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, I found Ben. No Tessa. No bags, no grand speech. Just him, standing there, holding an old photo frame. Inside it was a picture of me, younger, holding him as a toddler, smiling in front of the rose bushes we had planted together. "I found it in one of the boxes," he said quietly. I nodded. I remember that day. He held the frame a little tighter. "You look so proud." "I was," I said. He stepped onto the porch but didn't come inside. "I don't expect anything from you," he said. "I just wanted to say, I finally understand." I looked at him, not the man he had become, but the boy he once was. And for the first time, I didn't feel the ache of wishing he'd return. I simply let the memory sit beside me like a familiar song. "I'm glad," I said, "that you understand." He didn't cry. Neither did I. There was nothing left to cry about. He handed me the frame, nodded once, and left. No apology. No request to stay. Just a recognition. And that was enough. I placed the photo on the mantel, beside a candle, and the small wooden box where I kept Harold's watch. The room didn't feel like a museum anymore. It felt lived in, by me. Weeks passed. The seasons edged into spring. The house grew quieter again, but never lonely. Friends dropped by. Neighbors waved more often. Claire came by every Sunday to bake something new. The house laughed again, sometimes in whispers, sometimes in full, belly-deep joy. One morning, I got a call from a local community center. They were organizing a storytelling night, and someone had recommended me. "We heard you've lived quite a story," the woman said on the phone. I smiled. "Yes, but I'm not done yet." I agreed to speak, not about revenge, not about bitterness, about legacy, about quiet return, about what it means to be written off and to quietly, without permission, write yourself back in. On the night of the event, I read from the journal I had kept throughout the whole ordeal. The page that once read, "He never owned it," now had new words beneath it, written in calm, firm ink. I never left. I just waited for the world to notice. When I finished, the room was quiet, not out of confusion, but respect. That kind of hush that happens when people realize they've just heard something that's going to sit with them for a while. Afterward, a woman came up to me, silver hair, soft hands, eyes that had clearly seen both joy and betrayal. "Thank you," she whispered. That felt like my life. And that, more than anything, told me this story wasn't just mine. So now I ask you, have you ever felt erased, only to return stronger, softer, and still whole? Have you ever lived through being forgotten and found something better on the other side? If you have, I see you. Leave a comment and tell me what you reclaimed, because your quiet triumph may be exactly what another woman needs to hear tonight.